Victoria Ashford sat at the head of the long, gleaming boardroom table, her posture straight, her presence commanding. The glass walls of the high-rise office reflected the city skyline behind her, a symbol of everything she had built. Ashford International, a powerhouse brand known for redefining luxury through fashion, technology, and global philanthropy. Her tailored navy suit hugged her frame perfectly, subtle diamond studs glinting beneath her sleek chignon. Every detail about her screamed refinement, power, and absolute control. The executives around her hung on every word she spoke, taking notes, nodding eagerly. She was not just respected, she was revered. The daughter of a seamstress and a banker, Victoria had risen not by privilege but by sheer grit, talent, and unmatched strategy. She was the face of innovation, the embodiment of grace under pressure, and the heart of an empire that spanned 3 continents. At her side, though absent from today's meeting, was her husband, Elliot Ashford. Handsome, articulate, and charming in a way that often disarmed both allies and enemies, Elliot had once been her closest confidant and most trusted partner. Together, they had been the golden couple, his political finesse complementing her corporate dominance. But in recent months, Elliot had become increasingly distant. Late nights explained away with vague mentions of urgent deals, spontaneous business trips to cities that somehow never matched up with his calendar, and moments of affection that felt rehearsed rather than real. Victoria noticed the shift, of course, she noticed everything. But she had mastered the art of maintaining appearances. In public, they still posed for the cameras, shared champagne flutes at gala events, and smiled the kind of smile that magazine covers craved. Behind closed doors, though, there were spaces between them that used to be filled with laughter, strategy talks, and intimate dinners. Now, silence lingered. The cracks were hairline thin but unmistakably there. She felt them when she walked past his untouched side of the bed, when his cologne clung to his shirts long after he claimed to be working late at the office. She felt them in the way he avoided eye contact just a moment too long. And yet, despite the storm clouds quietly forming above her perfect world, Victoria didn't panic. She observed. She calculated. Because Victoria Ashford hadn't built a global empire by reacting emotionally. She had built it by planning 5 steps ahead, and if a storm was coming, she'd already begun designing the umbrella. Victoria had always trusted her instincts. They had never failed her, not when acquiring her first company, not during boardroom wars, not even in the subtle negotiations that decided whether her empire expanded or crumbled. But when it came to Elliot, her instincts whispered things she didn't want to hear. At first, it was the little things. A buzzing phone flipped downward before she could see the screen. Late meetings that didn't appear on his calendar. A change in his cologne, something more daring, younger, as if he were trying to impress someone new. He smiled less around her, laughed more on his phone. He kissed her cheek absent-mindedly instead of with the warmth they once shared. There was a new rhythm to his behavior, one that didn't align with the man she had married. She told herself not to jump to conclusions. Elliot had always been busy, always charismatic, always surrounded by people. Maybe he was just under pressure. Maybe he was going through something he didn't know how to express. Maybe, just maybe, this was a phase that would pass. But that was the problem with maybes, they were a dangerous form of hope. Victoria kept silent for weeks, choosing to observe rather than confront. She watched his behavior shift, felt his energy retreat like the tide pulling away from the shore. The man who once sat at her side during strategy dinners now seemed distracted, more interested in his phone than in her thoughts about the company they both built. And then came the night he claimed to be in Geneva for an investors' summit, only for his assistant to mention, in passing, that he had cancelled that trip days ago. Something inside her snapped, not out of anger, but clarity. That same evening, she called Claire. Her oldest friend, her fiercest defender. Claire was sharp as a blade and just as effective. A partner in a top-tier law firm, she had been by Victoria's side since their university days. "I need you to help me find out what I already know," Victoria said without breaking down. Claire didn't ask unnecessary questions. She simply said, "Let's get proof." Within days, they had hired a private investigator, discreet, efficient, expensive, and well worth it. What began as a gut feeling soon took form. Hotel receipts from weekends Elliot claimed to be at conferences. Charges to luxury restaurants in cities he hadn't mentioned visiting. A suite booked under a pseudonym he used to write fiction back in college. Only Victoria and a few close friends knew of it. The PI sent over photos, Elliot entering a boutique hotel in Paris with a woman who wasn't Victoria. The images were pixelated but clear enough to confirm what her heart already suspected. Victoria stared at the photos alone in her study, her fingers tightening around the sleek leather folder. Her face remained expressionless, the picture of restraint. But inside her, a quiet war was breaking out. One part of her, the wife, wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. The other part, the strategist, knew better. She had seen this play out in boardrooms 1,000 times. Disloyalty always started in shadows and secrets. And now, she had to decide what to do with the truth when it refused to stay hidden. The final report from the private investigator came in a slim, unassuming envelope, its contents heavier than any corporate dossier Victoria had ever handled. She sat alone in her private lounge, the city lights glittering below like stars spilled across the earth, the fireplace casting soft shadows across the white marble floor. She opened the envelope slowly, with the precision of someone unwrapping a truth she already knew but wasn't ready to face. Inside were time-stamped photographs, transaction logs, and witness summaries. But it was the photos that stopped her breath. Elliot, unmistakably Elliot, with Sabrina Vale. They were kissing outside a luxury suite at Le Château de Minuit, a 5-star Parisian hotel known for its discretion and indulgence. In one photo, Sabrina's hand rested intimately on his chest, her eyes gleaming with triumph. In another, Elliot's head was tilted back in laughter, completely at ease, as if the weight of his marriage didn't exist at all. Sabrina. The name cut deeper than she expected. Once Victoria's assistant, Sabrina Vale had come to Ashford International fresh out of university, smart, ambitious, a little naive but filled with potential. Victoria had seen herself in the young woman and had taken her under her wing. She had brought her into board meetings, let her shadow private strategy sessions, even invited her into her home during holidays when Sabrina had no family nearby. There had been late nights over wine and spreadsheets, whispered dreams about love and legacy. Victoria had championed her, defended her, even promoted her faster than most. To her, Sabrina had been more than a protégée, she had been like a younger sister. Family. Now, those memories played out in sharp flashes, each one like a blade slicing through her composure. The time she gifted Sabrina a limited edition designer bag after her first successful solo pitch. The night she comforted her when a breakup left her in tears. The letter of recommendation she'd written by hand to get Sabrina into a prestigious executive training program. All of it, now poisoned with betrayal. Victoria sat perfectly still, her fingers brushing the edge of the photos, tracing the outlines of a truth she could never unsee. It wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. A betrayal orchestrated by the two people she had trusted most, hidden in plain sight behind smiles, handshakes, and affectionate lies. Yet, there were no tears. No trembling hands. Victoria didn't scream, didn't throw anything across the room. Instead, she placed the photos back into the envelope, folded it once, and set it aside like an outdated contract. Her eyes reflected the flames dancing in the hearth, steady and unreadable. Then, slowly, her lips curved into something unexpected, a smile. Not of bitterness, nor of revenge, but of clarity. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed undeniable truth and knew exactly what she would do with it. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Every betrayal was a trigger, every scar a lesson. Victoria Ashford didn't crumble. She calculated. And as she rose from the velvet sofa, straightened her silk blouse, and walked back toward her office, the firelight behind her cast a long shadow on the wall, tall, elegant, and dangerous. Elliot and Sabrina may have thought they were winning. They had no idea what kind of woman they had just betrayed. The mansion was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that made even the ticking of an antique clock sound accusatory. Victoria waited in the drawing room, bathed in the golden glow of a chandelier that sparkled above her like a crown of judgment. She didn't pace or sip the glass of wine beside her. She simply sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, a file resting on the table beside her like a weapon she didn't need to draw just yet. When she heard the front door open and close, her heartbeat didn't change. She had already rehearsed every possible version of this moment. Now, it was time to deliver it. Elliot strolled in, unbothered, tugging off his coat with a tired exhale. "You're still up?" he asked casually, as if the weight of his lies hadn't saturated the very walls they stood in. Victoria said nothing at first. She watched him with eyes colder than the marble floor beneath them. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, stripped of emotion. "We need to talk." He hesitated, sensing something off. "It's late, Vic." "Can it wait until morning?" he said, feigning exhaustion. "I know everything," she replied, her tone soft but final. The words hung in the air like a slow-burning fuse. Elliot's posture stiffened. "What are you talking about?" he asked, playing dumb, reaching for a bottle of scotch from the bar. Victoria didn't blink. "Paris. Le Chateau de Minuit. Sabrina." Her gaze didn't waver. "Do you need me to show you the photos?" He scoffed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "So you've been spying on me?" "That's rich," he said, defensive turning to arrogant within seconds. "Maybe if you spent less time running the company and more time being a wife, none of this would have happened." There it was, the classic pivot, the blame deflection. Victoria almost smiled at the predictability of it. The door creaked again. Footsteps echoed softly across the Italian tiles. And then she appeared, Sabrina Vale, dressed in an ivory silk robe that wasn't hers, hair tousled like a woman who'd been careless in someone else's home. She walked in without apology, her heels clicking like defiance. She moved to Elliot's side and slid her arm around his waist, pressing herself close. "Well," she said with a smirk, "I guess the secret's out." Victoria studied her for a moment, this woman she had once protected, once mentored, now parading her betrayal like a prize. "You think you've won?" Victoria asked quietly. Sabrina tilted her head, amused. "We already have," she replied. "You can't stop us." For the first time, Victoria stood. Not in fury, not in despair, but with the grace of a queen who had already chosen her next move. She picked up the file from the table and held it loosely at her side. Then, meeting Sabrina's gaze without a flicker of fear, she answered simply, "I don't need to." She turned without another word and walked out of the room, leaving Elliot and Sabrina in the silence behind her. What neither of them knew was that the very foundation they stood on, their false sense of power, was already crumbling beneath them. The storm began slowly, emails leaked to gossip sites, whispers in industry circles, anonymous claims of financial mismanagement. At first, it looked like simple corporate sabotage from a bitter outsider, but Victoria knew better. The fingerprints were all too familiar. Elliot and Sabrina were moving, and they weren't being subtle. Sabrina, who had once sat silently in meetings absorbing everything like a sponge, now used that insider knowledge like a weapon. She had stolen confidential files, budgets, expansion plans, even delicate partnership memos, and fed them to select media outlets to discredit Victoria's leadership. Meanwhile, Elliot worked the board members one by one, flashing his charming smile, playing the wounded husband whose only wish was to protect the integrity of the company. He spoke with practiced vulnerability, twisting the narrative into a tale of a marriage lost to ambition, a wife too consumed with power to notice the cracks. Some board members, unfamiliar with the true dynamics behind the closed doors of the Ashford mansion, wavered. A few entertained Elliot's vision of a shared leadership model, where he and a new executive team would bring fresh direction. Sabrina, positioning herself as a rising visionary, began arranging meetings with international investors under Elliot's name. Their audacity was astonishing, but what they didn't understand, what they would never understand, was that Victoria had never built her empire on arrogance. She had built it on preparation. And she was always 10 steps ahead. Publicly, Victoria appeared unaffected. She attended conferences, smiled for the cameras, delivered speeches about innovation and resilience. In the boardroom, she listened politely as Elliot pitched ideas that once echoed her own. She let them think they were chipping away at her power. Behind closed doors, though, she was building a fortress. Claire, now operating more as her ward general than her lawyer, had mobilized a team of forensic accountants and cybersecurity experts. Every digital trail Sabrina had left while accessing protected files was being documented. Every NDA violation, every IP theft, every misappropriated file, cataloged and timestamped. Victoria and Claire also pulled up Elliot's financial activities, uncovering attempts to move shared assets and liquidate certain holdings without board approval. Claire smirked when she found the prenup clause Victoria had insisted on years ago, a clause Elliot had never bothered to reread. It stated clearly that any proven act of infidelity and breach of fiduciary duty nullified Elliot's claim to marital or corporate assets. Sabrina's name, showing up on too many wire transfers and room bookings, was all the proof they needed. Victoria said little. She kept her calm exterior intact, knowing the real strike wasn't meant to be loud, it was meant to be precise. While Elliot and Sabrina celebrated early wins in private lounges and whispered to sycophants about their inevitable takeover, Victoria prepared the final act. She met with key investors, offering transparency, reassurance, and control. She reminded them what Ashford International had become under her leadership, and what it would become again, once the rot was cut out. She made it clear that her silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. She was letting her enemies build their illusion so she could destroy it completely, leaving nothing but ruins behind. In their arrogance, Elliot and Sabrina thought they were writing the next chapter of Ashford International. What they didn't realize was that Victoria had already turned the page, and they were about to be nothing more than a cautionary footnote. Victoria had always known the importance of timing, when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to strike with precision. While Elliot and Sabrina played their bold, brash game in public, Victoria waged a quieter war behind closed doors. She invited a select group of key investors to an intimate dinner at a private club in Mayfair. The setting was elegant but discreet, perfect for what needed to be done. She wore a sleek black dress and spoke with her usual poise, but her words cut with surgical intent. Over a course of wine and softly seared sea bass, she laid out everything, facts, timelines, documents. With calm assurance, she presented Sabrina's real history. Not the polished CV she had once submitted to Ashford International, but the truth buried beneath it. A past incident at a startup in Berlin involving unaccounted funds that mysteriously vanished. A degree from a French business school that, when checked recently, had no record of her enrollment. An NDA settlement in Prague that hinted at professional misconduct. It had taken Claire's legal network and a private investigative firm to dig deep enough, but they had found it all. The investors, some of whom had started to doubt Victoria's control, sat stunned. One leaned back and muttered, "My God, she could have destroyed us from the inside." Victoria let them stew in the revelation for a moment, then gently reassured them, "That won't happen. Not on my watch." She continued with a calm revelation of Elliot's betrayal, not just personal, but financial. Unauthorized transfers, private dealings with potential competitors, and most damning of all, his failure to disclose his conflict of interest with Sabrina. The room, once filled with polite chatter and expensive wine, now echoed with the cold realization of how close the company had come to being compromised. Later that night, in the quiet of her study, Victoria pulled out the prenup Claire had helped draft years ago, when love had made her cautious but smart. Her fingers traced the clause she'd almost forgotten, one that now read like poetry: "Any proven act of adultery, combined with a breach of fiduciary duty, nullifies all spousal claim to company equity and assets." In other words, Elliot had unknowingly signed away his empire the moment he touched Sabrina. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, words from her childhood: "Always have your own money, your own mind, and a backup plan, even when you think you've found forever." Back then, it sounded like cynicism. Now, it sounded like wisdom carved in stone. Amid the corporate fallout, Victoria met someone unexpected: Lucas Carrington, a tech executive known for clean business, ethical leadership, and quiet brilliance. They met during a joint project between his firm and Ashford's innovation arm. Lucas was nothing like Elliot. Where Elliot performed charm like a polished act, Lucas was sincere, grounded, curious. He listened more than he spoke and treated Victoria not as a trophy but as an equal. He didn't come with promises or flattery, just presence. He offered support with no agenda, standing by her when others hesitated. Victoria didn't need saving, but it felt strangely comforting to meet a man who didn't want to steal her spotlight, just share it, gently. The boardroom at Ashford International had never held such electric tension. The city skyline gleamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting morning light across the polished mahogany table where the company's fate was about to be decided. Every director, every executive assistant, every department head sat in place, uncertain about what was to unfold but sensing that something significant, irreversible, was moments away. The agenda read like any other quarterly review, but the unspoken truth simmered beneath every pair of watchful eyes. The double doors opened, and in strutted Elliot and Sabrina. He was wearing one of his signature tailored navy suits, his smile rehearsed to perfection, projecting the false confidence of a man who thought he had won. Sabrina followed, chic in a crimson power dress, lips painted to match, her heels clacking across the marble like punctuation marks. She placed a sleek laptop on the table and sat next to Elliot as though she belonged at the head of the empire. They exchanged smug glances, knowing they had already planted doubt among the board. Elliot leaned back and folded his hands, ready to spin his narrative. Then the second set of doors opened, and Victoria entered. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She walked in with the grace of a woman who had already won and didn't need anyone's permission to reclaim what was hers. She wore a flawless cream suit, minimal jewelry, and a single sapphire brooch her mother once gifted her, the same one she wore the day she took control of Ashford International years ago. Her presence silenced the room, instantly shifting the balance of power. She sat at the head of the table, nodded to the board, and then finally looked at Elliot and Sabrina. "Before we begin," she said, her voice smooth and measured, "I'd like to address an issue of integrity that concerns both this company and its future." Elliot opened his mouth, but she raised a hand slightly, enough to silence him. She reached into her briefcase and removed a single folder, then placed it in front of each board member. "Inside, you'll find documentation proving the unauthorized release of confidential materials, internal misappropriation of funds, and undeclared conflicts of interest between board applicants and current stakeholders." Sabrina stiffened, her fingers twitching. Elliot tried to keep a cool face, but a flicker of panic sparked in his eyes. One of the board members, Mr. Lawson, squinted at a line in the documents and frowned. This is a clear violation of corporate ethics," he muttered. Victoria let them absorb the shock before continuing. "And if any of you still have doubts, I invite you to listen carefully." She pressed a button on her tablet, and the room filled with Sabrina's unmistakable voice. The recording was crystal clear. "You can't stop us. This is our empire now. Let her pretend she's still in control. By the time she figures it out, we'll already have taken everything." Gasps rippled through the room. Sabrina paled. Elliot shot her a glare that could have burned through stone. Victoria watched them both without blinking, her face unreadable. "That recording was obtained lawfully, with the cooperation of my legal team and third-party investigators," she said. "It confirms not only the intent to commit corporate sabotage but a conspiracy to defraud the company and its board." At that moment, the doors opened once again. This time, two members of Victoria's legal counsel entered, accompanied by a corporate security officer and a representative from the company's compliance division. "Effective immediately," Victoria said, her tone icy and definitive, "Elliot Ashford and Sabrina Vale are hereby terminated from all roles and associations with Ashford International." Sabrina stood up abruptly, her chair screeching. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." "I do," Victoria interrupted. "And I have the votes to back it." Board members, now fully convinced and furious at the betrayal, nodded one by one. Claire, seated at Victoria's left, passed forward a stack of signed statements of support. Your access cards are deactivated, Victoria continued. Your emails, revoked. Sabrina, you'll be hearing from the authorities regarding your fraudulent misrepresentation and violation of non-disclosure agreements. Elliot. She turned to him for the last time. You're not just fired from this company. You're erased. Your shares are nullified under the marital contract you violated. Everything you once had here, gone. Elliot looked stunned, unable to speak. Sabrina looked like she wanted to scream but realized too late that no one in the room would defend her. They were finished. Victoria stood. You're both fired. Not just from the company. From my life. As security escorted them out, the silence in the room turned into a slow but steady ripple of applause. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was the sound of order being restored. Victoria didn't bow, didn't bask. She simply nodded once, gathered her things, and walked out with the quiet dignity of a woman who had just reclaimed her empire, smiling, calm, and utterly untouchable. The dust settled faster than anyone expected. Elliot, stripped of his titles, shares, and influence, moved into a modest flat on the outskirts of London, a far cry from the penthouse he once shared with Victoria. Gone were the tailored suits, the chauffeur, and the exclusive memberships. His name no longer opened doors. Instead, it brought awkward glances, whispered gossip, and a reputation tarnished beyond repair. Sabrina vanished entirely. One day she was on every gossip blog, and the next, gone, no social media activity, no forwarding address, no contact. Some speculated she had fled to another country. Others believed she was lying low, waiting to rebrand herself. But to Victoria, she was nothing more than a ghost now, an echo of a betrayal she no longer needed to carry. Victoria, after delivering her final blow, did what few expected. She stepped back. For the first time in over a decade, she took a leave from Ashford International. Claire, now officially COO, assured her everything would be managed in her absence. And so, Victoria boarded a plane to Italy with Claire by her side. They rented a villa in Tuscany, surrounded by vineyards, golden hills, and skies that seemed to stretch into forever. There were long, slow mornings with coffee on the terrace, afternoons spent sketching ideas and wandering markets, and evenings filled with laughter, wine, and the kind of silence that felt healing rather than heavy. In the solitude of those Italian days, Victoria allowed herself to reflect, not just on what had happened, but on what it had revealed about her. The pain had been sharp, consuming, but it had forged something deeper within her. Strength. Clarity. She had faced betrayal head-on, and instead of breaking, she had carved a path through it. She thought about the version of herself who had once believed love would protect her, and she honored her. Then she thought of the woman she had become, fierce, unshaken, reborn, and she embraced her. One morning, a bouquet arrived. White lilies and deep purple irises, elegant and understated. The note was from Lucas. You didn't just survive. You redefined strength. Can't wait to see what you build next. Victoria smiled, a real smile, not one for cameras or press. For the first time in months, she felt something light bloom inside her again. Back home, the media had found its angle, the woman who fired her husband and his mistress in one breath. It was dramatic, sensational, and entirely true. But Victoria didn't read the headlines. She didn't need to. She already knew her story, and she was the one writing the next chapter. Victoria returned to Ashford International 1 year later, her presence more formidable than ever. Time away had tempered her, polishing her resolve into something sharper, wiser, and infinitely more ruthless when it came to protecting what was hers. The woman who once relied heavily on instinct now combined that intuition with a refined strategy shaped by hard lessons and painful betrayals. She was no longer just the queen of a luxury empire, she was a leader who understood the true weight of power and the importance of legacy. With a renewed vision, she stepped into the spotlight to announce the launch of a mentorship program dedicated exclusively to women in business. It was a bold initiative aimed at breaking glass ceilings and nurturing talent, born from her own journey through challenges that were as personal as they were professional. She wanted to create a space where women could support each other, build networks, and rise without fear of betrayal or prejudice. Claire, who had proven her unwavering loyalty and exceptional skill during Victoria's absence, was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. Their partnership was more than just business, it was a bond forged in trust and shared ambition. Together, they set new standards for Ashford International, driving innovation and corporate responsibility hand in hand. Lucas Carrington, the tech executive who had quietly supported Victoria when the world seemed to be crumbling, had become a trusted partner both in business and in life. His ethical approach to leadership balanced Victoria's intensity perfectly. The two worked closely on new projects aimed at integrating cutting-edge technology with sustainability, placing Ashford International at the forefront of the industry's future. Their partnership was no longer just professional, it carried a subtle but undeniable warmth that hinted at something deeper. One afternoon, as Victoria reviewed quarterly reports in her expansive office, an unassuming envelope arrived. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Elliot's. For a moment, her heart wavered, not with old love, but with the residue of past pain. She opened the letter with steady hands, reading words filled with apology, regret, and a desperate plea for a second chance. Elliot spoke of mistakes made in weakness, the realization of what he lost, and hopes for forgiveness. But Victoria's response was unwavering. She folded the letter neatly, turned to the fireplace, and dropped it into the flames. She watched as the paper curled and blackened, the smoke carrying away any remnants of the past. There was no room left for him in her world. Just then, the soft sound of footsteps approached, and before she could turn, a small, joyful voice called out her name. Her daughter, a radiant little girl conceived through a previous IVF journey and the brightest light in Victoria's life, ran into her arms. The child's laughter filled the room, shattering any lingering shadows. Victoria hugged her tightly, feeling the pure, unbreakable bond that no betrayal or heartbreak could ever touch. In that moment, surrounded by the future she was building and the family she cherished, Victoria knew life was not just about survival, it was about thriving. Ashford International was evolving, and so was she. The empire she led was no longer defined by those who tried to tear it down, but by the strength, vision, and love that would carry it, and her, forward. There are moments in life that carve themselves into your soul with such clarity that no amount of time can dull their edges. For me, one of those moments came in the quiet of a midnight confrontation, when Sabrina, brazen and unapologetic, looked me in the eye and declared, "You can't stop us." Those words hung in the air between us, heavy with arrogance and defiance. But in that instant, I realized something profound, not about them, but about myself. I already had stopped them. Not through anger or rage, but through an unshakable calm that settled over me like armor. That smile I wore afterward, the one that people have asked about, dissected, and misunderstood, wasn't born from vengeance. It wasn't a mask to hide bitterness or a spark to ignite a public downfall. It was a smile of release. The release from illusions that clouded my judgment. The release from the expectation that betrayal would define my story. It was the serene acknowledgement that I was no longer a victim to be torn apart by deceit but a force rising from its own ashes, stronger, wiser, and unapologetically whole. Trust, I learned, is a fragile thing, beautiful, essential, but vulnerable. It is the cornerstone of every relationship we build, whether personal or professional. And yes, it can be shattered, burned to dust by lies and treachery. But what most people fail to understand is that from that very destruction, something new can emerge. Not just survival, but transformation. An empire, not just of buildings or money, but of self. A reclamation of power that no one can steal because it is forged in resilience and tempered by pain. I think back on the nights when doubt whispered in my ear, when the weight of uncertainty threatened to crush my resolve. I remember the way I held my daughter close, the way Claire's unwavering support steadied me, and the quiet strength Lucas offered without ever asking for more than I was willing to give. All these pieces came together to form a mosaic of redemption and rebirth. And through it all, that smile remained, not as a trophy of victory, but as a beacon of hope. Because the truth is, you can burn a woman's trust. You can try to reduce her to ashes with betrayal and lies. But from those ashes, an empire rises. It rises not because it never faltered, but because it refused to be destroyed. It rises because every scar is a lesson, every tear a cleansing, every broken promise a step toward clarity. That empire is mine. Built on more than wealth or power, built on survival, love, and the unyielding courage to begin again. So, when the world watches and wonders how a woman can smile after losing everything, I tell them this: it's not the smile of someone defeated. It's the smile of someone reborn. And that, above all else, is where true power lies.